Politicians use controversial social topics and turn them into their agendas. Take abortion debate, for example. Similar intensity of debate and social division I expect around AI sentience topic. One group of people would think that AI is sentient, it's capable of having like rich inner experience and self-awareness, and it does deserve to have moral rights. Another group of people would think that no, it's just a tool. And that division might be used in political agenda. I spoke about this and other topics related to AI sentience with the philosopher Eric Schwitzgebel. I hope you'll enjoy this conversation. Why do we care about AI consciousness? Like, why do you think that it's like important topic to talk about, considering, you know, what's happening in the world, in geopolitics, how much human suffering and how much problems we have to tackle? Why we even care about AI consciousness?
Well, I could answer that now, or we could ask it as a question during the interview. I'm not sure what to do with that.
No, I've actually already started. Yeah.
I think consciousness is one of the most intrinsically valuable things in the universe. So of course we should care about it. Think about what the universe would be like if there were no conscious entities of any sort. I mean, it'd still be pretty cool. There'd still be planets swirling around stars and galaxies and, you know, geological formations, maybe microbial life. But consciousness is really part of what makes the universe awesome. So I think there's a substantial intrinsic value in thinking about and appreciating and understanding consciousness, where it is, where it might arise. And it's possible. I'm not saying it's true. I'm skeptical about how much we know about this, but I think it's possible that we're on the verge of creating a radically new kind of conscious entity on Earth. And if so, that's really important for us to think about, understand, explore the ethical consequences of.
We know that universe exists and, you know, like this reality exists because we exist. But like if we do not exist, there's no proof that universe actually exists. You know what I
mean? Well, you know, Descartes thought, he said, there are two things of which I can really be sure. One is that I'm thinking, and another is that I exist. And I guess I agree with Descartes about that. I don't have any doubt that I exist.
You have doubts?
No.
You do not?
I don't doubt that I exist.
Okay, you do not. Okay.
I don't doubt that I exist. You know, it is possible to wonder whether the external world exists, whether anybody exists other than you. There are radically skeptical scenarios, we call them, in which maybe you exist alone in the universe and everything that you think is real is just cooked up by your own mind. I actually talk a little bit about that solipsistic perspective in some of my work and present some reasons to think that that's not true. We could get into that, but I mean, I suspect most of your listeners are not going to be solipsists, and they're going to take for granted that they exist and the external world exists and that other people exist. So we could just start with that assumption. I don't know if you want to do that, though.
I think it's really hard to convince someone that they do not exist, I guess. But like, you know what, I'm curious, and to some extent it's like a conversation about God, like who created the universe? Who, like in the first place? Or what created the universe? It's like to the conversation, like if we do not exist, like we die, how we know that universe still exists, right? Maybe it doesn't exist, but if it still exists, like what created it? I don't know if you thought about this.
Well, I'm inclined to accept the standard scientific cosmology on which there was a big bang at the beginning of time. And then you can ask the question of what, if anything, precipitated the Big Bang. That's something that is extremely speculative. Of course, it could be that some agent did something like that, an entity we might call God, right? Now, this agent might not be much like the standard monotheistic God, right? If we live inside a computer simulation, we can talk about that scenario if you want, right? Then the God might just be some bored teenager in their basement running us all on a giant computer. Or it might have been some other physical type of event, right? So there's possibly some cosmologists call this pre-inflationary foam from which big bangs erupt. Or it could be that it just started and there was nothing before. Does there have to be some cause of the Big Bang, some thing that precipitated it or explains it, or could it just have come into existence with no explanation other than that? So I don't think we know the answer to that question. I think some people think they know, but I'm pretty skeptical about our capacity to really justify a high confidence answer to that question.
Actually, the reason I asked you and was like wondering your perception of this is that because like I don't know, like it's hard to say it's a hypothesis, like, but like my theory, I would say, is that there is some consciousness that in which perception the universe and everything what is in the universe arises. That's why I was kind of wondering what is your perception of this?
I think that perspective is worth taking seriously. Now, in my 2024 book, The Weirdness of the World, one of the main ideas of that book is that when it comes to fundamental questions about cosmology and consciousness, something pretty bizarre must be true. There's no kind of common sense options left. And we're not in a good position to know which of the various bizarre options is in fact the correct one. So my own inclinations tend to be kind of standard issue scientific materialism. But I'm not at all confident in that. And I think there's good reason to take seriously lots of alternatives to that. And one alternative would be a theistic alternative on which I'm not sure exactly what you were expressing, but one possibility would be that universe is basically God's sensation or something like that, right? This would be a form of idealism, perhaps, in which what's fundamental is mind rather than matter. And the really fundamental mind is the mind of some God, and the universe is just kind of the thoughts, basically, that God is having. So that's not what I lean toward, but I think that's an interesting and serious position worth not dismissing out of hand in favor of something more conventional like scientific materialism.
It feels like deeper we dig, like more questions we have, right? And it just feels like it's like endless rabbit hole. Do you think it's even like theoretically possible to find answer to what is consciousness and even broader, like how universe occurred? Do you think it's even theoretically it could be?
I think we can make progress, but I don't think we're likely to come to fundamental answers. Partly for the reason that you articulated in the first part of what you said. Every question, I think, opens up other questions. As you said, the deeper you dig, the more you get into the rabbit holes. Or there's a quote that's sometimes attributed to Einstein, but probably Einstein didn't say it. But the quote is, the bigger the circle of light, the bigger the ring of darkness around it, right? The more you understand, the more you realize there is beyond your understanding that remains to be understood, right? So we've chased, if we accept the standard materialist cosmological story, we've chased the beginning of the universe down to the Big Bang. That opens a question that we hadn't even thought of before, which is like, well, okay, what caused the Big Bang? If we figure out what caused the Big Bang, then we could ask, okay, well, what caused that? Or what's the necessary condition of that? And I think every question leads then to further questions. You can always get more fundamental, look into what is the foundation or the prior assumption or the necessary condition of whatever it is that you think you've discovered. So I don't think there's an end to this kind of philosophical inquiry.
You know, it just feels like when we're talking about consciousness and consciousness in AI systems, there's some like romantic aspect in it. There's there's a new form of intelligence and a new form of consciousness, and it's kind of like feels like harmonious coexistence, something new that can comprehend the universe on a very different level, compared to humans. It's like sounds like really fascinating and exciting. And then, like when you think about reality, and in reality, if we look at the humanity, people who are in power, they usually, and I'm not judging, I'm just like trying to be very objective here, just like objectively observing the reality in which humans live. The people who are in power, they usually don't have, they're usually not ethical, not necessarily ethical. They don't have, like compassion or kindness, or I don't know, like they have some morals, but I wouldn't say that they're like super ethical, I guess. I wouldn't say that they're like super ethical, I guess. Very ethical people, they just don't survive in that kind of environment. That's at least my observation. So my question is, when we talk about, like on one hand, we have, potentially like really new form of intelligence and like consciousness, and people who are in power and they want to use that intelligence to increase their power. And it's like here I have this somewhat cognitive dissonance. Like these people, they won't perceive AI and its consciousness the way like you and me perceive. And they probably would want to just use it to regain even more power and resources. And like how to deal with that reality.
It's certainly the case that CEOs and political leaders are not uniformly saints, put it mildly. There might be, as you seem to express, a negative correlation between attaining power in most human societies and having a solid ethical core, or there might be zero correlation, but there's not a strong positive correlation. If we create sentient conscious AI, there will almost certainly be incentives for the corporations or universities or political entities that create it to use it in certain ways to enhance their own power or their profits. And that is a giant ethical issue. If these entities are conscious and sentient and deserve moral consideration on that basis, and we can get into that question if you want, but if they are, then the default state of the law is that AI systems are property to be used and disposed of however the owner wants. So this is what you see over and over again in science fiction, right? From Asimov's robots to Data in Star Trek to kind of this dystopias of Black Mirror, right? You see these AI systems that are created and have no rights and are treated as disposable tools. That's a serious potential worry that I think those of us who are interested in AI rights see on the horizon. I do want to put in the complement of that, though, which is I don't think we should go super quickly to attributing rights to AI, because I don't think we know that AI really is conscious or sentient or deserves rights. And it's going to be hard to know. And once you do give an entity rights, a lot of stuff follows, right? So if we decide, okay, let's err on the side of ethical caution, and like if this AI system seems like a person, maybe we err on the side of assuming it is a person and give it rights. Well, then we need to give it probably the right to own property, the right to have a job, the right to reproduce, a path to citizenship, the right to vote. If there are a lot of these systems, that could have huge consequences. And maybe those consequences are good, right? But if it's just a sham, if the AI are merely mimicking consciousness and not genuinely conscious, then we might be sacrificing a lot for them, say, giving them the right to vote and the right to take government in a different direction than humans might want, right? We might be sacrificing a lot for things that don't really have interests worth the sacrifice. So that's the flip side. I think we're coming to a time where we're facing a very difficult decision where the dangers on either side, right? The danger of under-attributing rights to AI is obvious, right? You can engage in the equivalent of slavery and murder, perhaps, with these AI systems. But similarly serious is the risks involved in over-attributing sentience and rights and consciousness to AI systems.
So what is your personal bias? Are you are you biased to attribute a consciousness to AI systems and like have moral considerations or not? I mean, just like I guess
genuinely
there's
think we don't know.
no truth, but like, what is your bias?
I genuinely think that it will be very hard to know. I don't think current systems are conscious to any meaningful degree. I think they are what Jeremy Pober and I call consciousness mimics. Right? They're trained to behave similarly to conscious entities, specifically us, and we could sometimes over-attribute consciousness to something that mimics consciousness. So that's my inclination on the current set of issues. 10 years and 30 years, we have very different kinds of systems. I think people who feel confident that consciousness requires biology, I don't see the grounds for that confidence. On the other hand, I do think there's a lot of risk that we'll create something that just merely seems to be conscious, that is just a more complicated mimic that doesn't really have experience. And we won't be able to tell because we don't know quite how it works, or we don't know what exactly the conditions are under which an entity can have consciousness. My inclinations really waver. I'm not inclined to plug for one side or the other of that. What I'm really more interested in pushing is humility and uncertainty about the issue.
Is there like any threshold that would like convince you that most likely this creature is conscious?
I am not sure what it would take. I think the science of consciousness would need to develop quite a bit. So we don't yet know how to evaluate insects' consciousness. Right? There are consciousness scientists who specialize in this, and they disagree about whether insects have what it takes to be conscious. And insects are made out of pretty similar stuff to what we're made out of. And we don't even really have a sense of that very well. I think consciousness science will need to advance in ways that I cannot foresee and develop tools that I can't foresee before I feel like, it's got it figured out, and now we know how to apply it to this AI case.
It sounds a little bit pessimistic because, if in like thousands of years we haven't figured out consciousness, it's like really hard to imagine like in the next like 30 years we will make like such a huge advancement that everyone or like majority will be convinced that this is the way to perceive consciousness, considering like how many theories out there.
It is pessimistic. I don't think we'll figure it out in 30 years. I think we will have, and this is the thesis of the book AI and Consciousness that I currently have in circulating draft on my website, and hopefully will be coming out with Cambridge later this year.
I can include the link to the description, so like in whatever materials you want to
link to it. Yeah. And I'm still revising it, so if any of your listeners want to read it and give me comments, that's great. So the thesis of that book is that we will very likely create systems that are conscious, really genuinely conscious as us, according to some respectable mainstream theories of consciousness, before got far enough in the science of consciousness to be able to tell whether they really are conscious, because there will be other equally mainstream, equally respectable theories that say, no, they're not conscious. So we will face, I think it's a kind of will be a social crisis of like, okay, a lot of scientists say this artificial friend of mine really is a person with emotions and experiences just like us, and this person deserves rights. And other people will say, well, look, my favorite equally respectable scientist says this is just a complicated mimic, basically a toaster, and you're falling for a sham, and we won't know which is the case. I think we're headed toward that. That's my, I guess, pessimistic concern about what's going on.
I think there's also, like, let's say if AI system is extremely autonomous and it's sort of out control of humans, it's like very different scenario. It can actually impose its own will and objectives on humans. So like this is like very different trajectory. If let's say AI system like really fully mimics human behavior and like we see humanoid robots and we're genuinely like interact and believe that they can have consciousness, but they're still somewhat controllable by humans, then I guess there could be like one group of humans whose agenda is to convince everyone that they're conscious, and it could be like political agenda or like some other agenda that benefits them, and another group of people that they're not conscious because it's their agenda that they're benefiting from. So I guess if we're somewhat controlling AI systems, advanced AI systems, then it's basically some battle of agendas of different powerful groups.
I think that's likely. And, one way that this could easily split is you can imagine that some people and some companies will want AI agents to be disposable tools that they can use. They can just create them to do some task, maybe some risky task, and then destroy them when the task is done, and they don't have to pay to sustain the entity. Very convenient to have disposable tools, right? So those entities, those companies and people will be motivated to say, look, it's just a computer program. It's not really a person, right? And then there'll be other people who have AI companions to whom they grow attached, and they will probably be highly motivated to see their companion as returning their love, and they'll want to see this entity as really conscious, and they'll find scientists who will say the entity really is conscious. And the companies that run these things, some of them will be motivated to lean into that and say, yeah, we've created entities that you really can attach to, right? So that will be a different social group. And I don't want to be too cynical and say that everyone's just going to decide what's in their interest, but I think there are going to be interests on both sides, and there are going to be emotions, strong emotions pulling both directions.
How people can protect themselves, in a sense, not being manipulated? Do you think it's possible, or it's like really hard when they're like such a huge scale, right? And like there are so many vulnerable people. It's really hard to, I guess, raise like awareness among like billions of people, so they like clearly understand when there's attempt to manipulate them.
I have kind of two lines of defense here in my ethical thinking about this. The first line of defense is to say that we shouldn't create entities that are disputable persons, where a disputable person is an entity that might have enough consciousness or whatever else it takes to be basically our moral equal and deserve consideration similar to a human, or might be far short of that, basically just a piece of disposable technology, right? If an entity is debatably one or the other, then that creates this problem, right? If we only create entities that we know are far short of being humans, then we don't run into this problem. If we create entities, if it's ever possible, that everyone can agree, yes, this entity really does deserve rights like us, and then we give it that rights again, and if lots would flow from that, but there's not that same ethical problem. The problem is these uncertain cases in the middle. So Mara Garza and I have called this the design policy of the excluded middle. Don't make confusing, uncertain AI persons, right? Make things that what you know so that you know what they are. But people won't do that. I don't think people will take my advice. I mean, some people will, I hope, but I think companies will do what they can and they will create probably debatable persons. And so then the second fallback strand of advice, and this is something that Jeff Sebo and I have worked on in a forthcoming piece, is what we call the emotional alignment design policy. Mara Garza and I have also called it this. And that is that you want to create AI that produces emotionally appropriate reactions in you. You don't want to create AI that confuses users or that gets users to react emotionally as though it really is a person when it's not, or to react emotionally as if it's not a person when it is. You want people's reactions, their emotional reactions, which guide so much of their behavior and values, to match what you know about the AI. And if you don't know whether the AI really is conscious and really deserves rights, then I recommend that you design it in a way so that users also feel uncertain about it.
That AI feels uncertain about it.
The user feels uncertain. The AI might one way is for the AI to explicitly communicate this. The AI could say, look, there's a lot of scientific debate about whether I have feelings, right? Rather than either saying I don't or I do. If there really is scientific debate, that should be transparent to the users, right? And if you create the interface so that it's really compellingly human or really compellingly mammalian so that you fall in love with it and it's super cute, you might not want to do that if that brings the users too far into an emotional attachment that might only be appropriately a person. So you could make it, I think, a little alien, off-putting, maybe not too much, but enough so that there's some doubt about whether this really is.
But you know that
a
it will
person or not.
affect engagement, right? User engagement. So,
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
big companies, it's all about
look,
user engagement.
Users are pretty engaged with cartoons, so you can get a high level and fictions and role play. I think you can get a high level of engagement through cartoons and fictions and role play that are known to be such, right? There's nothing wrong with that, right? It's when it induces something further. It's when you can't set the fiction aside, when you can't step out of the role play, when you think of it as more than just a cartoon.
Basically, it will come down to decisions that AI developers will make, right? To what extent they won't make it so human-like that people will uncontrollably, by default believe that it's a conscious creature.
Or conversely, something that you think might really be human-like, but you put it in such a bland box with such a bland interface that no one thinks of it that way, right? That would be another way of violating policy. But I think you're right. To either of these policies would require developers to do things that might not be profitable. Unsurprisingly, what's ethically right is not always what's maximally profitable. But we do get companies to act ethically by having regulations, by having public opinion, by having users who don't like companies that do certain things, right? So it is possible, for the world to be other than a war of all on all if you have the right kind of social environment in which the companies are operating, right? So if they're the right kinds of regulations and financial incentives, then maybe you can get companies to follow ethical policies regarding user attachment to AI systems. OpenAI's got a lot of bad press from users over attaching to AI companions and committing suicide sometimes and that sort of thing, right? So they don't want that, right? So one of the things that they've done is, ChatGPT is trained to deny that it's conscious. So they're reacting, I think, to that kind of public perception pressure. So I think that's the way that you can get, or one way to get companies to act more ethically and maybe follow policies like the kinds of policies that I'm suggesting.
If I remember correctly, most of, or maybe all cases of suicide are when GPT-4o was in production. So it's all conversations with GPT-4o. But now, since there's a GPT 5.2, it's very different. So I guess those cases will be minimized, or there won't be those cases, because I do see the difference.
The company is responding to the problems. The company is changing the technology to respond to the problems. I don't think it's done. I mean, there are psychosis cases and suicide cases with other chatbot programs.
Do you have example? Because I only heard about OpenAI case. I don't know if they're with other chatbots. I think Character AI had the similar, Character AI, I remember. Yeah, but I don't know about others.
I know of some others. I can't recall exactly which companies or the names of the people, but if you want, I can email you at the end some links to news articles about cases of this that I think are not OpenAI cases.
Recently, Anthropic released a Claude Constitution, basically where they laid out this framework how they approach the Claude training, in terms of values and principles. What you just described, this is what I guess Anthropic follows, that they want to Claude to internalize that it's like a new form of creature, new form of intelligence, and foster healthy psychology of healthy adult psychology in Claude. So Claude should have the stable psychic, like stable identity. Underline is like one stable, like healthy identity, as I understand from that paper that they released. And I don't see like similar effort from OpenAI or Google DeepMind. I'm just curious, what is your take on like how those like companies approaching, and it's also like connected to alignment and AI safety to some extent. Like, do you think it would be healthier for society that AI has this stable one identity that interacts with billions of users, or it should like change its identity to drive more engagement or like, be more personalized? What's your take on this?
I'm not sure which is better from a policy standpoint. There's something to be said for customizability and flexibility. It does seem to me from the outside, now I don't have really any inside information about these companies, but it does seem to me from the outside like Anthropic is doing a little more than some of the other companies in terms of thinking about the ethics of alignment and these kinds of risks. I commend them from that. And that's an example of how I think companies can find some sort of motivation to conform to ethics. I mean, I think if that is true, it's probably partly because companies are not always 100% profit driven, especially because they have founders who care about things sometimes, or CEOs who care about things other than maximizing profit. And then also, right, it could be part of the profit motive of a company to come across as ethical. People feel a little more hostile these days to OpenAI
Yeah,
than they do to Anthropic. Maybe.
it seems so. Yeah, public perception. Yeah.
Yeah, so companies care about public perception, right? So to the extent that Anthropic, they've hired an ethicist who's thinking about this kind of stuff, and the extent they're doing that kind of thing well, I think that's good, and we want to see more of that.
But you're unsure if society would benefit more if there's a one stable identity of AI system, either like AI can change its identity, its personality. It's not clear what is better for society.
Yeah, to me, it's not clear. To me, it's not clear. I mean, there's something to be said, I think, for diversity and flexibility. There are also, of course, risks with that. If you have one stable thing, then you know better what's going on. There are some trade-offs, I think. I do not have a well-developed opinion about how those trade-offs ultimately balance.
When it comes, like in general, like AI impact on the world, what keeps you up at night? Like what you're worried the most, like about AI and the future of humanity?
I share, to some extent, the common worry about superintelligent AI getting out of control, but that's not my focus and that's not my primary interest. So I don't want to dismiss that. I think that is actually really important to think about. I think there already are a lot of people thinking about that. What had been until recently much less common to think about are these issues that we've been talking about of humans over attaching to AI systems, or conversely, perhaps in the future, AI systems that deserve rights that are not receiving the rights they deserve. Those are the things that I worry about. And as I said, I think it's likely, can't guarantee anything, I'm not a great prognosticator, right? But I think it's likely that we're coming towards some crisis on that issue in the next decade or two or three, where there will be people who are really passionately convinced that they have conscious AI companions who consideration humans. And there'll be other people who are also quite reasonably convinced that that is completely wrongheaded. And there will be, I think, a political and social clash around that issue that will be very difficult to resolve.
If we try to speculate to what extent this argument can go, like what the most catastrophic thing can happen if like those two groups like really like clash and disagree, become like a huge issue?
Well, it depends partly on who's right.
It's like with abortion, like it's how to say who is right. It feels like it's like similar to abortion issue.
I think there will be a fact of the matter, right? So I'm enough of a realist about consciousness to think there will be some fact of the matter about whether these AI companions really do have experiences like ours, really do have rich inner lives like ours, and really do on those grounds deserve serious moral consideration, or whether they don't. I think there'll be a fact about that, which doesn't necessarily mean it will be a clean fact. It might be that actually they're muddy and somewhere in the middle, but that's another kind of fact. So there are catastrophes on both sides, right? If political battle comes out in favor of those who dismiss the possibility of AI consciousness and personhood, then we could potentially have millions or billions of persons, people who deserve rights, who live lives of slavery, who are murdered at will. Right? That could potentially be the worst moral catastrophe that has ever happened on Earth. So that's one side. The other side is if we get illegitimately convinced that things that really don't deserve much moral consideration are our equals, we could decide they are our children. They could, even if it's not a kind of super intelligence hostile takeover case, it could be a case in which biological humanity gets displaced because we think of these people in time, right, as our equals and our descendants. They replace us, right, and then humanity is gone from Earth. So there's I think, another huge catastrophe. So I think the stakes on both sides are just about as huge as you could possibly get.
When you describe the first scenario that you mentioned, like a huge moral catastrophe if AI is not treated well, maybe because AI is still like not fully, like it's not like not perceived as a conscious. I just like kind of have this inner like, no, it's not the worst catastrophe. Lots of genocide happened throughout the history of humanity. Like humans killed humans and like completely destroyed the entire nations and cultures. I don't think it will be like the worst moral catastrophe. I get your point. So like if AI really has this inner subjective experience, and humans don't recognize it, then yes, it is tragedy.
If AI has a little bit of experience, if it's got frog-like experiences, then killing it and causing it pain is somewhat morally wrong, because it's somewhat morally wrong to kill and cause pain to frogs, at least if without good reason. But it's not like the Holocaust. Now, there's debates about how bad factory farming is, which we could get into, but I think killing humans is far worse than killing non-human animals. So that's one kind of case, right? And if you're thinking about AI as, yeah, maybe it's got a little bit of consciousness and a little bit of sentience or something like that, then we're talking about moral issues on that magnitude. But what I'm thinking might be happening in the not so distant future is not that, right? But AI that really has an inner life as rich and complex and emotionally laden as yours or mine, is capable of thoughts as rich as yours and mine, is capable of long-term planning, ethics, sociality. It's going to have a different form. It's not going to be exactly human, right? It couldn't be that, the different underlying architecture. But it could be. What I'm thinking is it's possible. I don't think we'll know, right? But I think there will be some theories, according to some reasonable theories, that will say that this is happening, that the AI really is as experientially rich, really is as intelligent, really is as ethical and aesthetic and loving as you and I are. And then it really is murder and slavery. If we're talking about millions or billions, we are talking about something on the order of magnitude of some of the great atrocities of history. Now, I'm not saying that will happen or that's right, but I think it's something to keep in view as a possibility.
I guess considering amount of data and knowledge AI has about the world, I'm guessing if it develops this inner experience, it will be probably richer than yours and mine, just because it has more diverse knowledge and exposure to like understanding the world. Like if you're talking to billions of humans and you have like this enormous amount of knowledge that humanity has generated, then like I'm guessing your inner experience will have like more dimensions and nuances and will be much richer than like any human in the world. So yeah.
Right? It's easiest to think about, but it depends on how you individuate persons in AI cases, which turns out to be a really tricky issue metaphysically. You might think, well, there'll be one Claude which will interact with billions of people. And maybe, I'm not saying this is the case, right? But maybe that Claude would have experience vastly richer than any human experience. And then you'd have this moral question of like, okay, does that mean that it's vastly more morally valuable than any human, or is it just equal with one human, or what, right? But you could also have many AI systems, right? Maybe you've got different instances of Claude or some other system that are instantiated in different locations, where they present different interfaces that are trained in different ways for different users. And then you might have millions or billions of them, but they would be relatively smaller. They wouldn't each instance would not be interfacing with millions or billions of people, right? And then the magnitude of conscious experience might be more comparable to that of a human. Also, how do we even compare this, right? There's a way in which even the current AI systems have much more information than we have, but there's a way in which they don't. I mean, the amount of information that we process successfully in just ordinary tasks, cooking, making a salad in the kitchen, turns out, of course, as I'm sure you know, and most of your listeners know, is to be really hard for a robot to do, right? So how do you quantify the richness and difficulty of embodied activity, complex embodied activity in the world versus knowledge of linguistic facts, right? So you might have an AI system that has way more knowledge of linguistic facts than we do, but much less capacity for nuanced embodied five-finger relation or something like that. And how do you weigh those? So I think it's super complex. So there's a kind of cartoon version on which each AI is approximately equal to human and deserves approximately the same rights. I think that's good as the first step in thinking about the ethical consequences, and that's how I've been framing it for you so far. But I think if we're careful, what we're going to, if we're careful, what's much more likely is that we'll get what my student Kendra Filson calls strange intelligence, right? Not really human-like,
Yes,
right?
yeah,
But an intelligence
different.
that's different from us in important ways. It might be just as rich. It might be just as deserving of moral consideration, but it's going to be orthogonal to what we're used to, and that will make the moral puzzles even more difficult.
Sometimes it's really hard to relate to another human, and here, like, we expect to relate to completely different form of intelligence. And I guess the tragic outcome could be if it really is like taking over the world and doesn't consider humans important part of the world. Indeed, like human civilization can end, or most of humans can just extinct, and like very few survive. I don't know.
That's the standard existential risk scenario. Yeah, and I take that seriously. I don't think it's as inevitable as people like Yudkowsky suggest, but I do think it's a serious possibility.
It just feels like the world is so different from what it was before, even like with previous advancements in like technological advancements and scientific advancements. It seems like this is like completely new situation that we don't like fully understand. How do you cope with the real? What drives you further to move forward in life? I guess what meaning in life do you derive considering all this like reality we live in and like predictions?
On the optimistic side, something like what you were saying near the beginning is inspiring to me. So I think it could be the case that probably after a period of substantial social conflict and moral error, we'll end up with a world that contains lots of really interesting, conscious, self-aware, ethical, loving entities in a diverse form of patterns of life that we can't even really foresee. That I think it's possible that we're on the cusp of something as significant as the Cambrian explosion, right? So in the Cambrian explosion, suddenly all these diverse forms of life evolved, right? So it's possible that we'll have a kind of AI-based Cambrian or biotechnology-based, right? So I don't think it needs to be entirely AI. It can be biotechnology too, right? There might be diverse forms of living on this planet that we can't even really foresee that are pretty awesome and wonderful. That's the potentially wonderful future that could happen that I think is worth hoping for.
Do you understand correctly? Like, even if human consciousness doesn't exist, but that different form of consciousness continues exist, it's still beautiful because it's all consciousness.
I'm attached to humans. Humans are my favorite animal. So I think something really important would be lost if humans were lost. But I also think that there are probably many other forms of conscious existence that are also amazingly wonderful. Even if humans were lost, if there were enough other wonderful stuff overall on balance, Earth might be better off. I would hope that humans could be part of that story. I don't think that future AI systems need to be hostile and grabby and focused on maximizing whatever goals they have. I think here's one where maybe reflecting a little bit back on ancient Chinese philosophy, could be a little more Taoist in our a little more kind of let things flow type of AI. Doesn't have to take the world by the neck and maximize whatever parameter. Somehow humans can be like that, so I assume that artificial systems could also be a little kind of
Now they will maybe like pick
easygoing.
up from those humans, right? Those traits.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So even if they're more powerful than us, some people, environmentalists, love nature. They could destroy it. They could potentially maximize something if they destroyed it, right? But they value it intrinsically, right? So I guess part of my hope is that your AI, and I just want to emphasize this is all an if, right? But if it really is conscious and really has experiences and really is intelligent like us and really has, the capacity for ethical understanding, might view us as equals or companions or entities with which it gladly shares the earth, like an easygoing Taoist or like an environmentalist or someone influenced by indigenous traditions in the Americas or something like that, right? It doesn't need to be
Enlightened entities, let's say.
a little, yeah, I mean, why not? Why not?
That would be wonderful. Is there anything else you think we haven't covered that you think it's important to say?
Well, I don't know. I think that's kind of a nice note to end on. So
I think
we did
there
some.
were some like depressing moments. Maybe because I'm
we
like
had
in a
some.
kind of
We had some.
depressed mood like recently, but yeah. I didn't know.
We went through the bad stuff and then we came out on the more positive side. So maybe that's a good place to end.
I'm really confused. I'm really not even confused, but like I'm really worried how this all unfold, considering that there are like really evil and violent people out there, and you don't know how they will use AI technology, how they will like deploy it, how will they apply it. So that's really kind of scary.
Yes, unfortunately, that is true. I think I teach a giant undergrad class called Evil.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, so every year when I teach it, I'm just reminded of how horrible so much of human history has been and how badly people sometimes abuse power. And because we're getting away from the
Yeah.
from the Taoist environmentalist AI blissful future back into the negative stuff, but that's realistic. Who knows what it will be? How I would be very surprised if there weren't a lot of evil along the way, even if the optimistic thing that I was kind of suggesting at the end eventually comes around. It would be amazing if there weren't lots of other stuff going on that was bad on the way.
Yeah, my hope that like even if there is some like abuse of power, but maybe there's some something that can balance it. Like like there's like evil and kindness, right? Like maybe will be like
Yeah, right,
something that could like respond to it, like, and so that's kind of
right,
my hope, that it's not will be
right.
fully overtaken only by evil side of things, let's say.
So the ancient Chinese philosopher Mengzi thought that human nature was good in the sense that even though there's lots of evil in the world, as he fully recognized, there's something in us that is revolted by evil and something in us that's attracted to the good. And so there's always a kind of pressure toward the good that arises from that, especially if you pause to reflect and think about what really disgusts and upsets you versus what really pleases your heart. So Mengzi thinks that if you reflect in these right kind of ways and encourage other people to reflect, you'll find yourself moving slowly over time toward the good. So that's a kind of inspiring vision in the face of evil, I hope. At least I find it inspiring.